All right. So tonight's webinar is very timely. Election 2020, what investors need to know. And tonight's agenda, we're going to copy 3 items. 1, we'll take a quick look at our red light, green light model, consider what updates have occurred since we last spoke. 2, we're going to recap the Trump economic record. And 3, we're going to discuss what might happen on election night, or more realistically, what might happen on election month. It will be interesting, very interesting. First, let's take a look at the economic model. What has changed since last month is that because the stock market is down 10% from where it was a month ago, we've changed our red light, yellow light on the stock market to half yellow, half red. That's actually some good news. Right now, we're holding a lot of cash, but if the stock market fell another 10%, we would move forward and start investing in clients. We expect to invest excess cash sometime in January, regardless of the outcome of the election. Economic reports are still pretty dire. Most importantly, up here, we're still in a recession. We're going to be in a recession for a while. That's the most important thing. That affects everything else, obviously. Inflationary expectations right now hardly anything to be concerned about. Technical factors in the stock market, money flows, overall valuation, net not helpful. Too much of the market is carried by 10 stocks, and those 10 stocks have faltered in the last month. That's why the market's down 10%. Earnings estimates look like dog meat for the next year or so. On the plus side, Federal Reserve policy. Last month, a client asked how long I thought rates would be held to 0, and I thought through at least 2021. But since then, the Federal Reserve has come out and said they're holding rates to 0 through 2023. And then over here, the politics section. I had to come up with a new color besides red light, yellow light, and green light. I chose purple, as in the color your face gets when someone punches you in the face. Bruise. Every week I ask myself, could things possibly get worse in Washington? And every week I am surprised that they in fact do get worse. So we'll have a lot of conversation about that as the time goes on. So overall, a little bit more bullish on stocks compared to a month ago, but I'd like to see another 10% fall before we start moving fresh money in. And for those of you who are fully invested, don't worry about it. That 10%, 20%, you'll never even see it a year or two from now. Okay, so this was the past week. I've started to make a list of all the crazy things that happened. So in this past week, the New York Times reported that Donald Trump paid no federal income taxes for 11 of the last 18 years, sheltered by decades of business losses. Billions. He currently owes $1.1 billion on mortgage properties. The properties may be worth less than $1.1 billion. He may be heading towards bankruptcy. So that is certainly interesting. Certainly, any other individual with this situation could never get a security record in the U.S. government, a security clearance in the U.S. government. 75 billion people watched the most debased presidential debate ever. Halfway through the debate, I turned to my wife and said, "Is anybody winning here?" And the answer is no. Not Trump, not Biden, not Wallace, and not the American people. It was awful. We might be spared the next 2 debates. We'll see. It may not happen. On Thursday, or actually Friday morning, very early, Trump tweeted that he was infected with the coronavirus. In fact, he'd known he'd been infected for a couple of days. That did not prevent him from running up to Bedminster to his country club to host a big private event for wealthy people who are now terrified that they're sick. The most likely, Trump and his inner circle contracted the disease during the ceremony to introduce Judge Amy Coney Barrett as nominee to the Supreme Court last Saturday. And as a result of that, 2 senators who attended are sick. A third one is sick. 2 other Republican senators said they're not going to vote in favor of advancing Barrett's nomination. So what seemed like a slam dunk a week ago now is a big question mark. And it just makes you crazy. But more importantly, both the Trump administration and the campaign are now decapitated, with multiple collateral infections announced daily. The White House is a very small, contained space. Nobody there was wearing a mask. They all had this cavalier assumption that because they were in the White House, they would be safe. And now numerous advisors of Trump are sick. His campaign manager is sick. The Republican National Committee chair is sick. Chris Christie, who coached him on debating, is sick. And then who else in the administration is sick? And by the way, it's not just a question of sending people home to work for a couple of weeks. They need secure phone lines, and it's not a home office situation. So if I was the Russians or the North Koreans or the Iranians, I would be making trouble right now. Our country is actually rudderless. Very hard to get information on how Trump is doing in the hospital. He has a pretty severe cold. He made a video. He looked pretty frail, pretty weak. For once, his hands weren't waving all over the place. He was kind of holding his hands together. So I think he's in poor shape, but we will not really get much good information from this administration. Someone commented he would be released as early as Monday. Yeah, we'll just see. We'll just have to see. Pence, by the way, would be next in line of succession, followed by Nancy Pelosi, followed by Chuck Grassley, who's the most senior member of the U.S. Senate, and then after that, I think it's Steve Mnuchin. So when in your entire life did you have to go to Wikipedia to find out what is the order of succession for the U.S. president? When did you ever have to worry about that before? Another 6,000 Americans died of coronavirus. That is the equivalent of 2 9/11s in 1 week. So far, 215,000 Americans. That's about half as many people that died in World War II. Remember when 4 people died in Benghazi, and there were 10 congressional commissions to investigate that? I would like to see the congressional committee to investigate this coronavirus response, because it has been catastrophic. And then finally, just for sheer goofiness, Brad Parscale, the deputy manager of the Trump campaign, became Trump's 8th advisor to be arrested, following Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Michael Cohen, and George Papadopoulos. And the speculation, he was arrested actually after beating his wife and threatening her with a handgun. But the speculation that the reason why he had an emotional breakdown was because he'd stolen $40 to $50 million from the Trump campaign over the last year, and that information was starting to bubble to the top. And if you want to have some comical relief in what has otherwise been a pretty terrible week, go watch the Brad Parscale arrest video. I think this is a fantastic metaphor for our year. A drunk, shirtless, shoeless guy being slammed to the ground by the police. That just seems perfect metaphor for how this year is going. Despite all this, despite all that, Trump's approval rating is actually rising to 44%. That's the highest level since the impeachment trial ended in February. Really hard to believe. Trump's approval rating on running the economy is generally 5 to 10 points above his overall approval rating, and it's often higher than Biden on the same question. And Trump campaigned in 2016 that he was a businessman, not a politician. So a lot of my clients have said, well, David, listen, I would love to vote for Biden, but I'm afraid it will hurt my pocketbook. So let's see how Trump actually did over the past almost 4 years. These are the Trump economic metrics. And by the way, I could give 200. I'm going to just give 11, just to kind of get through the evening in some reasonable time frame. Unemployment declined from 4.7% at the end of the Obama administration to 3.5% through February. That's pretty good. But now it's 7.9%. It was as high as 16%. Net job growth for the entire Trump administration down 852,000. That is probably the worst result for any post-war president, Truman forward. Just negative, awful, even worse than George W. Bush, 2000, 2008, who left the country in a terrible recession. Manufacturing jobs down 700,000. Trump was supposed to be the manufacturing president. He made a huge deal about wanting to boost coal jobs. And so I looked that up. It was 50,000 at the start of his administration. There was a slight bump through 2017, but now it's down to 40,000. And there's a very good reason for that. Coal is dirty and dangerous and expensive. And if you look out the window, there are solar farms and windmills going up everywhere across America. 200,000 jobs in installing solar panels alone. Why not just pension off those last 40,000 and close the coal mines for good? Wouldn't that be the logical thing to do? Unfortunately, not for this president. Manufacturing output down 14%. Net economic growth down 25.7%. For the first 3 years, the Trump economy grew at about 2.5%. That's slightly better than the last 4 years of the Obama administration, 2.3%. My opinion is Trump inherited a great economy from Obama, who, by the way, worked with Joe Biden to fix it after the last Republican president blew it up. And all he had to do was nothing for the next 4 years, and the economy would have continued to do just fine. But instead, it did not. China is probably already the world's largest economy. The economic comparisons between countries is very difficult, particularly China, where the numbers are not always the best. But in terms of purchasing power parity, China's already had. In terms of sheer dollars, it might take a few more years. But we'll look back, a couple years from now and recognize that 2020 was the year when China became the world's largest economy. So much for America first. $46 billion were paid by U.S. consumers on goods imported from China. $14 billion were paid to U.S. farmers to offset lost sales to China. So Trump taxed all of us and gave a good chunk of that money to farmers, but nobody won. Farm bankruptcies are at a record level. Nobody won. And the other thing about that is, all of a sudden, one person is making macroeconomic decisions, kind of a centralized economic approach that was typical of Soviet Russia. All of the decisions are made from the top and trickle out to the masses, and that didn't work very well. So why are we doing that here in the U.S.? That's not the American way. National debt up 31% to a record 26.6 trillion. Donald Trump swore he would run the deficit down to zero in the first 4 years, and we knew that was a lie. Net new spending on national infrastructure. The need is $2 trillion for airports, railroads, bridges, tunnels. Most importantly, electrical grid. Our electrical grid dates from the 1950s and 60s. It's terrible. It's third world countries have better infrastructure because it was built in the last 10, 20 years, not the last 67 years. The actual dollars spent was zero. No infrastructure spending at all. Labor force participation rate was 67% in 2000. That was probably the year that average Americans recognized the times were the best at the end of the Clinton administration. Now it's down at 61.4%. So that gap of 6% or so between 67 and 61, that represents millions of Americans who don't count as unemployed anymore, but have given up looking for work. So that's taxes we're not getting, income not received, people aren't spending money on goods and services. So just when you have numbers that low, it's just a big drag on the economy. Here's one statistic where Trump clearly has an edge over all other presidents. The real family income level rose to $86,000 last year. The previous record was about $66,000 in 2008. So that's through 2019. I have no idea what that number will be for 2020. We probably won't know until the middle of next year. So Trump would like to argue that he brought unemployment down to the lowest levels ever, 3.5%, highest family income levels. Okay, true, but all that seems to be turning into tears in the last 6 months. Excuses. Trump's number one excuse for the failures of the last 6 months is the pandemic. He claims that without his intervention, fatalities would have been 2.5 million in the United States, not 215,000. Well, in Germany, fatalities were held to 9,600. If you adjust that to the US population, that would be 20,000 people, not 215,000. Daily deaths in the US averaged 750 a day over the last 7 days, and by the way, are on the upswing. It'll be 1,000 or 1,500 a day as we get into October and November. In Canada, daily deaths averaged 10 per day. That's 100 per day if you adjust for the US population. That number was down to about 7 per day for a couple of weeks. It's on the upswing now. Again, yeah, people are going back indoors. Schools have reopened, but still, there is not a single country on the planet that has a worse record for responding to the pandemic than the United States. And if that doesn't make you furious, you are not paying attention. Excuse number 2. Trump is a disruptor. I heard that a lot earlier on, not so much of late. And when I hear that, I kind of feel like people don't know what a disruptor actually is. So let me explain. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Otherwise, we'd still be using whale oil to light our homes. Henry Ford made cars a mass market good. Otherwise, we'd still be riding horses to work. Stephen Jobs' iPhone means that we carry a supercomputer in our pockets at all times. Being a disruptor means creating something so amazing that it completely knocks out a whole bunch of other things that were there before, right? Nantucket was the energy capital of the world. Nantucket, Massachusetts was the energy capital of the world in 1840 based on whale oil. And by 1870, it was wiped out. How many people had a Nokia flip phone or a Motorola candy bar phone back in the day? Other way around. It was either a Nokia candy bar or a Motorola flip phone. 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Those brands don't even exist anymore. They were wiped out by the far superior product, the iPhone. The BlackBerry was wiped out by the far superior phone, like the iPhone. If you just smash things and don't replace them with something better, that does not make you a disruptor. It makes you a vandal. And in case you don't remember, Vandals were the German tribe that swept down into Rome in 1410 Common Era and sacked the city, burned the buildings, carried off the treasury, enslaved the citizens. And Washington D.C. has a very kind of Greco-Roman vibe about it, and this is kind of what it feels like right now in Washington, just chaos. So anyway, that's the Vandal. So what's going to happen election night? And I'm going to switch actually to my browser because there's some really nice interactive things that we can use. Keep an eye on the time. It's 18 past. Let's jump over to the browser. So this is a fun website, 270 to win. And having a little bit of stickiness because of making sure I can see all my windows. That's not what I wanted. Let's go back again. All right. So this chart is the consensus of about 11 political analysts about how the election is going to turn out on November 3rd. It's a combination of looking at polling plus their own intuition, their own interviews or whatever. And right now, Biden has a slim lead of 278, needs 270 to win, Trump 169, but still quite a few undecided states. The most important ones are Florida by far, but also Arizona, North Carolina, Ohio. I do not think Ohio would be in the mix, but it is. These are the states that Clinton won in 2016 that crushed her campaign: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And I expected Hillary to win that night, but when Florida went for Trump at about 9 p.m. Election night, I go, well, that's not cool. And then North Carolina went for Trump, and then Pennsylvania went for Trump, and that's when I turned off my my TV. If we see how things might be coming into the election coming up, well, it's still a pretty similar chart, except that we can pretty much add these states to the Democratic column. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota look to be Democratic as well. Pennsylvania, probably. North Carolina, probably Republican. And so look how close things are now. Nope, it looks like Let me throw one more state back to, let's throw Pennsylvania back to the Republicans just to make this chart interesting. Okay, so now things are pretty close, and then there's a few small states that come into play. For example, Nebraska, Maine has 2 states that will probably go Republican. Nebraska has a loose clinic that will probably go Democratic as well, and then New Hampshire will probably go Democratic. So now we're at 269 to 240, very close election. And here's what's left: Florida. Florida is the single most important state to watch on election night for a couple reasons. First off, we could have a tie, 269 to 269. If if Biden's actually blown out Trump in another state, well, winning Florida is the kill shot. It's not numerically possible for Trump to win if he loses Florida, but it could go the other way. It could be a Democratic Florida. It could be a Republican Pennsylvania, and now you're actually in the worst case scenario. No clear win for either side. At that point, let the litigating begin. And it wouldn't be just the state of Florida this time. It would be in a dozen states. And there's a hard cutoff December 4th, beyond which the states must certify, their electoral head count. And if it's not clear, it is possible for the state legislatures to simply declare one candidate the victor or another. And then it would be even worse than the 2000 outcome in terms of bitterness. So what you want to see on election night is whether Florida goes Democratic early on, game over. If not, it's going to be a long month.